have about half of the people in, so I will say good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this May 20th. Just so you know, it is Wednesday for those that have been home for the last 8 weeks. We're super excited to have you here today. For those that aren't familiar, this is a Women's Energy Network Colorado event, and we're going to be talking about managing risk through a sustainable supply chain, and we have a great panel of guests for you we're super excited about. A couple of things before we get started. One, give a little shout out about who we are. We are an organization that is part of a larger national organization. We are one of 20 chapters across the US, and we are a membership organization that focuses on empowering energy professionals by building community, providing education and networking opportunities. Sadly, right now, as we all know, all of our networking opportunities are virtual, but so far they've been a success, and we're excited to have you here today. You'll see on the screen a couple of the fun WENCO facts that we have. WENCO stands for Women's Energy Network Colorado. I'm super excited about the fact that we currently have 546 active members. Our goal was to get to 500 by June, so we're already surpassing that, which is awesome. And then we also have a new program, the WENCO Water Cooler, which is a podcast that we launched earlier this month. And if you're interested, you can find all of our episodes on Apple, Spotify, and Google. And we are dropping those every Wednesday during the month of May, and then on the first and third Wednesdays during June. A couple of upcoming events that we have. We have our May 27th virtual happy hour. If you did not attend the April one, you missed out, and hopefully you can join us for the May 27th one. We also have, as I mentioned, the water cooler episodes dropping this month in the next few weeks. And then we have our second session of how to be a mentor, which is a 6-part program to really train you on how to be a leader in your career, your personal life, and or your community. So today we have 3 great speakers. We have Ashley, Uche, and Matt. In a moment, I'll do some quick introductions. But one of the things I really wanted to point out was that you can connect with us, on a variety of platforms. So there's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and then you can also email us if you have any questions. So to get started, I am going to introduce Uche Ejiasa, and I'm pretty sure I just screwed that up again, Uche, who has spent the majority of his 18-year plus career in supply chain in various capacities in multiple industries like aerospace, automotive, and manufacturing. With his most recent tenure in oil and gas as the director of supply chain at DCP Midstream, he is currently responsible for the strategic sourcing group, where they continue to uncover great ways to help navigate DCP through this challenging, unprecedented environment. Fun fact about Uche is that he has a hidden talent as a matchmaker, but not the dating kind. Because of his insane support of women, his matchmaking is specialized in connecting smart, strong women in both personal and professional life. Matt Dankner has been the director of supply chain at Whiting Petroleum for the past 3 years. Prior to joining Whiting and starting the supply chain department, he worked for an international financial institution in risk management and also for a national public accounting firm doing risk consulting. So Matt is currently on the board of Mile High 360, and one day, based on an internal presentation he did for us a few months ago, he hopes to own his own food truck, which I'm sure he'll explain in the presentation. And then last, but definitely not least, is Ashley McNamee, the Director of Communications and Corporate Responsibility for Whiting Petroleum Corporation. Though Ashley grew up in oil and gas, she didn't think she'd be working in the industry and instead started her career as a news anchor in Illinois. And she's got great stories. I'll get a chance to have a glass of wine with her. The oil in her blood took over, and in 2014, Ashley joined Whiting and has been crushing it ever since. In addition to her director responsibilities, she also serves as the chief of staff to the CEO, where she focuses on optimizing business processes, organizational structure, talent development programs, and the operational effectiveness of the company. Most recently, Ashley was recognized as one of DBJ's 2020 Top Women in Energy by her peers. So thank you, Ashley. Congrats on your honor, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thanks. I think we're all embarrassed now, so that's a good way to get it started. Matt and Uche, thanks for being here. I think we can all agree it's the new world we're navigating right now. OPEC, COVID pandemic, pressures from environmental, regulatory, and consumers. Our industry just continues to change every day, and supply chains increasingly critical segment of our industry. So I think our panel is very timely. If you two could maybe start by telling me about the company and how you guys approach supply chain, and maybe we'll start with Uche.
Sure. Thanks, Ashley. So DCP, obviously, we operate in the midstream space, so effectively we are positioned right in between upstream and downstream. So we take and refine natural gas and transport it. The way that I think we look at supply chain is maybe surprisingly not dissimilar from, I think, how perhaps any other industry looks at supply chain, in that we know that we need to procure both the goods and the services that enable us to be a good customer. And so when our producers, the upstream producers, are relying on us to do things sort of quickly, be very agile, it's super important that we have the goods and the services in place to ensure that we can meet those standards and frankly exceed those standards. So we look at supply chain as one of the core competencies that we have to get right, I guess, for lack of a better word, because the minute that we start not being able to surprise and delight our producers, things go pretty downhill quickly from there.
Matt?
So actually, like to share with the group initially that when we were talking about this panel, I viewed a midstream company as being very different than an upstream company, which is what Whiting is. We primarily develop and extract oil and gas from the ground. We do have some midstream components similar to a DCP midstream, but really we're focused on getting oil out of the ground and then providing it to companies like DCP Midstream to help us get that oil and gas to market. That said, we view supply chain very similarly to a DCP Midstream. Really what it comes down to is helping our internal customers, all the folks that are out there developing oil and gas properties, that are keeping those oil and gas properties running, keeping the oil and gas flowing, helping them make sure that they have all the goods and services they need to meet our internal goals. And so from that standpoint, we really have the exact same focus.
All right, sounds good. How would you guys describe the relationship between risk management and supply chain in your companies? Is it closely connected, or is it separate groups? How does it work? Uche?
Yeah, so great question. I kind of look at it as we partner very closely with our environmental health and safety group as well as our legal groups, and I look at supply chain similar to the I guess quote unquote enforcement arm, if you will. So we're carrying out a lot of the processes set forth by those different departments just to ensure that we're not losing sight on the fact that safety is a number one priority. So, for example, when we're talking about different things like ESG reports is a great example, how our suppliers play into that and how they ensure that from a risk profile, our contracts are in place and our contracts are papered up properly. Our suppliers are operating in a safe and reliable manner. There's a few metrics that we have and some third-party organizations that help us keep track of those things. But you know, it's obviously anyone who works in this industry understands how high risk it is. And it's very, very important to make sure that not only are our internal employees operating at a very high level, high standard of safety and risk compliance, but also that our suppliers are following suit as well. So that's where supply chain sort of comes in and is the body that the company looks to govern a bit of that, making sure that the relationships that we have, that's very crisp and clear to them, and they understand that when they're coming out to a DCP site or when they're representing DCP in any fashion or way, that safety and subsequently risk is top of mind for them.
Matt?
So we're, again, very similar to a DCP Midstream. You know, we're an integrated key component of risk management as it comes to the work being performed on our oil and gas sites, which is obviously a huge risk factor for us, whether it's environmental health and safety, compliance, you know, risk of loss from a catastrophic disaster on a site. All those components, supply chain is really key to not only enforcement, but key to administering. So for example, within my team, we're responsible for vendor onboarding or vendor management. which includes our master service agreement and making sure that our vendors meet our insurance requirements. And also we're working very closely with other departments, such as health and safety, who actually vet our vendors and make sure that they meet our health and safety requirements. We're working very closely with our legal team and as well as our operations team. And within Whiting, we actually sit within operations, so we're really a part of that group, a part of that team, which to me has been a key part of our ability to navigate and work with folks to help ensure that our vendors meet those requirements.
So Uche used the magical word sustainability. So I'm interested how ESG and sustainability have impacted your supply chain practices, your company, how you guys operate day to day. And maybe you can start with this one.
Yeah, I would say DCP released our first inaugural ESG report this year, and that was a great lift from a bunch of different people across the company coming to bring that together. I would say that as a general comment, prior to us endeavoring down the path of putting together an ESG report, safety has just always been super, super critical for DCP, and making sure that we're doing things in a sustainable manner and so on and so forth. This sort of just that lends itself to I guess articulating that a bit more formally. But in terms of a shift of how we've just sort of always operated and looked at things, that's been sort of status quo for as long as I've been at the company, certainly predating me as well. But what's interesting is there are certain things I think that you don't, as you're operating as just a normal course of business, you don't think to bring to light like, oh, right, we do this, or we sort of tick this box, and we so on and so forth. So the ESG helps you start thinking about those maybe more thoughtfully, and also understanding what areas there are for opportunity to improve and to get better, so on and so forth. So I think that's been one of the most enlightening things from my optic is just how many different components and inputs go into an ESG report, and how there are a lot of ways, frankly, that if you're not looking at them, things can kind of spiral out of control. A little stressful, but whatever, that's part of the job. But it's very, the ESG report has just made it more formalized in terms of how you're looking at how is your company operating, not just from your own operations, but also your suppliers, how are they representing you? What are different programs that you're putting in place to continue to further that discussion about sustainability, environmental impacts, so on and so forth. So for me, that's been the most eye-opening thing, is that it just really forces you to be very thoughtful about those different things.
Very true. Matt?
So Ashley, you're well aware, Whiting's really been focused on sustainability, particularly over the last couple of years, and completely agree with everything you said. And I think there's one differential part for me and my experiences in working with the sustainability reporting folks and really looking internally, is that sustainability, while it's great and it's the right thing to do as a corporate citizen, it's the right thing, it's the right information we need to release to our external stakeholders. In almost every single case I've seen, what is good from a sustainability perspective is also great for Whiting from a business perspective. So, initiatives within sustainability such as tracking waste. Well, tracking waste helps us control our costs related to waste. Driving down the waste, the volumes of waste we produce, by the way, drives our costs down as a business. And so in almost every example I've encountered within sustainability, what we're trying to do, what we're putting a framework and a structure around and actually tracking, is helping us become a more efficient, better business. And in a lot of the conversations I've had with folks around sustainability, that's often something that it isn't brought to the forefront. And for me, it's been incredible. Sustainability has been a fantastic initiative for us as a company, but also it's helped us control our costs better. It's helped us get better at understanding our business. And so the results have really been astounding.
Yeah.
One thing, if I could, sorry,
Yeah,
Ashley, if I could piggyback on Matt, because he made some really great points there. One thing that really resonates with me about what Matt just said is oftentimes supply chains are thought to go after the lowest price for something. And there's a nuanced difference here, but bear with me. So, right, so price and cost, right, from a supply chain person are two completely different things, right? So generally speaking, people think like, oh yeah, if you get the lowest price for something, then you're doing a good job. And it's just like, well, especially to the points Matt just made about sustainability, it isn't always the lowest cost, the lowest price provider that you go with. And frankly, sometimes the lowest price provider should scare the heck out of you because that typically could mean that they might be cutting some corners or doing some things just to make sure that they're keeping their prices low. So from an overall total cost of ownership, right, you'll hear that kind of buzzword tossed around. What supply chains are looking at is to make sure that the value that they're bringing to the company is such that at the end of the day, when that whole thing comes full circle, whatever that process is, transportation, that good, whatever it is, that the cost to the company is the most competitive, not necessarily the price. So I think those were really great points, Matt, that you just brought up.
Yeah, and I agree. You kind of hit on something. When you talk about the sustainability framework, you dig into what you really measure within supply chain. It's not always what you would expect. In fact, sometimes it's how you're embracing and working with suppliers who are local and the way you're supporting your communities through the way you're sourcing your goods and services. And going from local to global, we're starting to get some questions about the COVID crisis. Let's start by talking about COVID and how it's impacted each of your companies. And Matt, why don't you take this one first?
Sure. So, COVID obviously has been a dramatic change for all of us in how we work and really our personal lives and professional lives. But to me, from a supply chain perspective, and I'm curious to hear what you have, Uche, what you have to say on this, Uche, is that to me, COVID, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's changes in supply and demand, whether it's tariffs, all these factors that even internally inflicted issues within Whiting. So, for example, late changes in scope to a project, right? All of these changes that we deal with from a supply chain perspective really have a dramatic effect in terms of our ability to your point, total cost of ownership, get best value. And when we're put in a situation where we need something immediately, we're paying more for transportation, we're not getting it from the best vendor, when we're not ahead in planning, or we're having to react to dramatic changes in plans, that really puts us in a tough spot from a supply chain perspective. That said, in our business, particularly in oil and gas development, that's just a reality that we face. We're not a manufacturer with steady demand and a steady production schedule, and that's something that we need to build in contingencies and be as flexible as we can and still be able to drive best value. So those are my initial thoughts on it.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Ashley. Excuse me. Yeah, 100% agree, Matt. And I would add also that I think COVID. So DCP kind of stood up a return to the office task force and sort of just trying to be very thoughtful about how we start allowing people to start trickling back into the office should they desire. And so, right, there was a lot of scramble to get a lot of PPE into the office just to make sure people felt safe and so on and so forth. And I will tell you, if I never have to see a digital thermometer ever again, it will be far too soon. But the ramifications of what COVID did to supply chains, both domestic and globally, is unlike anything I've seen. To Matt's point, Matt brought up a bunch of different things like tariffs, for example. The idea of the concept of globalization has been getting kind of punched in the gut a lot lately. And COVID was just sort of another right hook to this idea of making sure that people have access to global markets and being able to source things freely and things of that nature. And it's the strain that I think we're seeing and probably have only just begun to see is this notion that countries are looking to keep things more domestic. And from a supply chain standpoint, that's terrible. That things are going to be way more expensive. The idea of risk that we were just talking about, that becomes inherently worse because when you have a smaller pool of suppliers you have to pick from, the ramifications of it on a global scale, I think, from a supply chain perspective, are not being good, for sure. And so even when DCP is looking at sourcing different things, let's talk about steel, for example. You have domestic steel mills and international steel mills, right? So there's always generally a good play there to make sure that you have a good sort of balance of what options that you have. The minute you start cutting off half of those contenders, yeah, things get pretty ugly pretty quickly. So COVID has definitely impacted supply chain from my perspective in a negative fashion, and I don't know that we've even seen the tip of the iceberg yet for it.
That's a good point. It's probably still developing. Somebody did submit a question here asking how challenging it's been navigating differences in states' reopenings or closings throughout the pandemic. And I know we operate in North Dakota, for instance, and they had a travel quarantine. So if you left the state or tried to come into the state, you had to isolate yourself for 14 days. So I don't know, Uche, maybe you start here, where if the closures or restrictions through COVID impacted you guys in your operations.
I'm sorry, Ashley, was the question around travel?
It's about how the state different, like the reopenings, the closings, the regulations in each state, how those impact business.
Got it. Yeah. So I think the biggest challenges is when you're looking at labor. Oftentimes it's not uncommon for example, if you need an engineer, specialized engineer to fly into a project to look at something or to lay eyes on something physically in the field and not necessarily just like a PNID or some other sort of schematic or whatever. It's not uncommon for crews to mob in and mob out, people to fly in, fly out, so on and so forth. So it absolutely has created challenges with when individuals are no longer able to do that. It's just like, I mean, okay, we'll do it virtually, but you start having a little bit of a sinking feeling in your gut because it's just like, there's just something to be said about somebody being able to physically be on site and lay eyes on something and actually sort of understand what you're talking through and so on and so forth versus trying to show them something virtually. And so I think that has definitely created some uncertainty, some unease around if a certain state has or a certain area or jurisdiction has very stringent guidance around whether or not people can come in and come out. That I think we're seeing in terms of just having people and access to people and people being able to sort of come into different projects and look at certain things.
Matt?
So within Whiting, I think we're less geographically diverse than a DCP Midstream, for example. Most of our operations are in North Dakota and Montana in the Bakken. And for us, while we have a significant presence in Colorado, our office is headquartered in Colorado, and we do have operations in at least 10 other states, the bulk of our business, the bulk of our activities in those areas. And for us, just because of we're less geographically spread out, I think we've had less to deal with. To your point, Ashley, North Dakota putting in travel restrictions has really forced us to think about work differently, to really work virtually. I got to give a really big kudos to our IT team. This is really an unprecedented time in terms of what we've been asked to do remotely, how we've been asked to work, and we did it on really short notice. And gosh, we did a survey of our managers and employees asking how productive folks have been and how would that have compared to working in an office. And Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 80+% of respondents said they're as efficient or more efficient working remotely. And I think that's really a testament to our IT team and really collaboration and people's ability to pivot and change during this time.
Yeah.
It's been pretty fantastic.
For sure. Well, while we're on the subject of technology, I think when we would normally talk about supply chain, we would start looking at technological advances like automation and other ways technology is impacting your part of the business. But we could start by talking about, as Uche's already sort of led on to, how is technology impacting us like today in terms of all this remote work and how difficult it has become, or has it become difficult as you guys are trying to work through this all via Zoom meetings and phone calls instead of in person? Matt, do you want to go?
Matt, you want to-
Sure. It's funny. I was talking last night with my wife, and first of all, she's shocked. She's never seen me at work, and basically, I'm working from our basement every day. And so, it's funny. I mean, to me, this has been a net positive in a lot of ways. For my team, there's folks that certainly have had some challenges around balancing, a spouse that works with young kids and trying to, with daycares closed and schools closed. And there's been a lot of challenges during this time. However, there's all these silver linings. So, I go upstairs for lunch and I get to have lunch with my kids every day. And it's, all the travel. So just being away from family and all the extra time that you're spending commuting, traveling for work. I was spending 1 to 2 weeks a month in North Dakota and Montana. And with this ban on travel, I'm being forced to look at work a different way and try and be just as effective and partner with folks and build those relationships, just doing it through Zoom. And really, I think going back to that survey that was done within Whiting, I just feel like it took something like this for us to really open doors to work in different ways. And tying back into sustainability, so all the travel, all the stuff that comes out of working call it the old way or call it the traditional way, for us to be able to have a smaller footprint, for us to be able to provide employees more flexibility to see their families and work from home and do other things. In a lot of ways, there's been a lot of things that have come out of this time that are, I think, incredibly impactful and beneficial to our partners, to our vendors, and also to our employees and to Whiting as a company.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments around. I think one of the benefits has been a newfound balance in terms of just being able to just manage your day in a way that's it makes you feel like you have a bit more control, right? If you're not commuting for long periods of time, being able to have more personal time with family. Those things I think have been quite beneficial for the vast majority of people in this environment, which is maybe something that was unexpected. I think to the point Matt made earlier, this was such a sudden shift that I think the expectation was that what are we going to do? This is a little crazy, but everyone sort of picked up and hit the ground running, and I think it's been. People have been quite productive because they have a bit more control of that balance. And then secondarily, I think for DCP specifically, maybe even almost fortuitously, we've been working pretty diligently on our ICC, and that is Remote Operations Remote Monitoring Center that's in Denver, in downtown Denver. And so bringing on a bunch of plants and whatnot to that network, to where we're able to actually control various things from a remote standpoint. I think the idea that we've spent as much time as we have doing that and standing that whole thing up, and we were in the process of bringing on a few more plants when this whole thing sort of came upon us. But the idea that we were starting to sort of master that and really get into a good groove about exactly how to do that and what that looks like and so on and so forth. Had that not been stood up, things may have been a little bit different for us in terms of figuring out how to scramble and resolve all these things and making sure that we can keep to our promises and our commitments to our upstream partners. And I think this could have taken a left turn, and because some of that stuff was largely in place, I think that was a good thing for sure.
Yeah, just this is sheerly out of curiosity and might not be something you guys can answer, but Uche, when you were describing earlier about, people not being on location to do some of the work they would normally do and they're trying to do it remotely, and the
Mhm.
fact that I think most companies before COVID maybe would have been less receptive to working remotely and embracing some of these changes. As we look forward, I mean, how do you think this will impact technology in your part of the world after COVID? I mean, and thinking of it from like a risk perspective, somebody's
Yep.
not on location inspecting something, does that change the way you're liable? I mean, I just kind of curious how you guys are. I'm sure it's a work in progress, but how you're contemplating all of that as we look ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think it's definitely been a work in progress. You figure things out and uncover things that you perhaps wouldn't have had to think about before. But and I think Matt alluded to this earlier, the bottom line, I think, for us comes down to trust and collaboration. So a lot of the guys that are working remotely and working sort of in Denver, so on and so forth, they have to be so tied to the guys who are the boots on the ground at the facility. Otherwise, again, the nature of our industry is very, very high risk. And so, one wrong step to the left or to the right could be catastrophic. And so developing a cadence where there's people who are looking at things remotely and delivering those communications, those messages to folks on the ground, that the folks on the ground trust that they're doing so in their best interest, they're doing so in the best interest of their safety, of risk, of all those different things, right? Where it's sort of, when I started first getting up to speed, and by the way, I know about as much as a probably 2-year-old when it comes to all of this stuff. But when I start getting sort of exposed and up to speed to exactly what these guys are doing, you sort of start thinking down the path. Someone who has a non-technical mind like mine, you start thinking like, oh, does that mean that they flip a switch here and it does something over there? And it's just like, well, listen, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But I think the idea just boils down to when people are looking at data, when people are trying to uncover trends, when you're talking about technology and you start maybe even edging into the space of like predictive analytics and really trying to resolve things before they even happen, and so on and so forth, and trying to go where the data is driving you, it's almost impossible to do that fully remote, right? You've got to have some sort of partnership with folks who are on the ground and substantiating what you're seeing from a remote standpoint, so that the next time something like that happens, you've sort of created that environment where you're just like, yeah, I remember this happening from here. We resolved it together, and we can sort of start moving on. But then I wouldn't even get into the whole sort of legalities of technology and all of those things. But even that has been, right, our legal team, our IT team, they've just been all over it in terms of how do we look at risk differently now? How do we need to paper certain things up to make sure that, what might have been true for something that was actually in the field and operating in the field, there's going to be some legalities that are quite different when you're looking at contracts and stuff. So it has been a very broad learning experience. And again, I think we're just scratching the surface of exactly what all that looks like, but it's been very interesting to chart that course.
Matt?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Ashley, I'd like to piggyback onto some of the great things that Uche just said. I think the broader question on that journey is, how do you get people to trust? How do you get people to partner? How do you make that progression? And then on top of that, how do you do it with folks that are incredibly technical, incredibly skilled with their hands, incredibly knowledgeable in our industry, but don't know and trust IT, don't know and trust technology? And what makes them fantastic at maintaining a pipeline or making sure an oil and gas facility continues to produce is their consistency in day-to-day and knowledge of how to operate that location or that pipeline. And that consistency, routine, day-to-day that they're so focused on every day, because it gets them, it helps us achieve our goals. Trying to get them to change that routine and rely on things that they've never relied on is really challenging. And I can speak a little bit with Whiting on that front, and trying to get folks to trust data on a screen in a command center or in a control room and have it really mean this is what's happening on site is a huge leap. And where we've had success over time is building that incremental trust. It's small things. Maybe it's not that huge leap to data on a screen. Maybe it's something as simple as, hey, we're really focused on cutting costs to make our business model sustainable. We have, in a pipeline example, we have planes flying over a pipeline that we own for regulation purposes, and it costs us a lot of money. Hey, maybe we can trust a drone flying over the pipeline. Maybe we can even fly the drone, record the video, and save that for compliance reasons. And then we cut out that cost of a pilot and plane and get essentially the same value, but actually have more control over the service, have more control and more ownership over meeting that compliance requirement. And the reason I bring up the drone example, the reason I bring up that example of technology is technology isn't just computers, it isn't just software, it isn't just systems, it's different technologies in terms of how we work and how we operate at a field level too. And so there's really tiny examples where we can make incremental gains and build that trust over time. And I can share from waiting, anytime we've tried to make that leap all the way to trusting a system or trusting data on a screen, gosh, that leap has been really hard. Where we've had a lot of success is incremental change over time going in that direction. And all of a sudden, a year or two later, you look up and you're there. You're trusting the data on a screen, or you're trusting that technology. But that change process, that change management piece, it really enables everything. And if your folks are comfortable, if your folks are bought in, if you're doing it in a way that allows those changes to take root, you'll fly. If that isn't occurring, you're just going to be having the same conversations over and over again and really spending a lot on technology and not getting the benefit out of it. It's a difficult journey.
We have a question, and I think it's pertinent to this part of the conversation around, do we think that these recent changes will last, or do we anticipate will somewhat go back to normal? Speculative, obviously, but curious what you think.
Yeah, so I can start. I definitely don't. So I don't know that we can go back to normal, only because normal has been pretty effectively decimated. There are, right, just if you're looking at sort of resources, headcount, et cetera, like there is no returning back to that, right? Like, and the idea, the comment I think I made earlier about the concept of globalization and how that's changing, and it'll be a while before that sort of reverts back. If nothing else, I think it's showed this current environment, I think, has shown how, for better or for worse, how connected so many different things are, and how this idea of needing to sort of adapt and change, and certain areas where, again, who could have ever had any insight to see any of this coming? Nobody. But it still begs the question of what could we do differently so that in the event something like this happens again, we're sort of much more agile, much more nimble. We can react, we can pivot, we can do all these different things to make sure that we're sustainable, and then things continue to operate and function as they are. And I think the basic fundamental of the basic fundamentals of that problem, or solving that problem, is the need to adapt and the need to change. So staying status quo, or frankly even going back to what I'll call sort of status quo, I feel anyone who thinks that that's happening, or that should happen, or we should revert back to some semblance of that, I'm not sure that I don't think that's the path to go down. A point sort of in that same vein, as Matt was talking about, sort of incremental steps on building trust from a technology standpoint. A great example of that that our EHS group put forth was there are these things, and I'm sure they have a bunch of different names, but they're black line monitors, I believe. And all of the guys there was sort of a mandate from H&S that everyone in the field had to wear them. And they basically, my understanding is that not only do they sort of track, I believe they track sort of noxious gases and things that might otherwise endanger you, but they also let people know where your location is, so that in the event that you're not moving or you haven't checked in or what have you, people can immediately get to you, know where you are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Initially, I think the notion behind that is just like, oh, that's just Big Brother trying to figure out where the heck I am at all times, right? So it's just like that lack of trust existed. But then I think people very quickly could see like this thing could actually save my life. If something were to go downhill pretty quickly, yeah, I am going to make sure that just assuredly as I put my boots and pants and hats and whatever else on, I'm putting this monitor on. And so even the idea, right, I think if you were to ask anybody in the field, hey, would you want to go back to the time before you never had that thing? They would resoundingly say, absolutely not, right? So it's just how do we sort of continue to make those incremental changes to get better, and to further this discussion about how to survive in sort of these types of environment. I think going forward is the only way.
That's a great
and all your points are great, Uche, and I completely agree with your view on it. And I'd extend your comments, Steve, and say the organizations that learn from this time, that approach business differently, that really, I mean, to me, it's a culture change internally in a lot of ways. The folks that can pivot and adopt and change culture coming out of this are going to be positioned in a different way than companies that don't. This is, to me, a moment where companies that go back to old operating methods, they're not going to be competitive with companies that emerge from this time that have adopted new approaches to work, new approaches to technology, new approaches to supply chain, for example. And, you know, and it's a funny thing to say it because the reality is folks don't, have you ever seen somebody change their mind or shift a view overnight? And that's really what we're being faced with now. If organizations can change culture, can pivot, can be quick learners and adopters during this time, I think they're going to emerge from this as more sustainable companies and also much more competitive companies performing better than their peers that didn't pivot. And so I view this actually as a huge opportunity for Whiting and a huge opportunity to really differentiate ourselves exiting this time.
We have another question kind of pivoting back to ESG and sustainability, and it's asking what initiatives are in the forefront for each company this time. So Matt, why don't you start with this one?
So I'd start with, we have a number of very important initiatives that related to ESG and supply chain or ESG and sustainability that supply chain is not directly involved in. So I'm going to take a step back and say, I'll talk specifically about a couple initiatives that supply chain is more involved in. So for example, we're very focused on tracking and managing waste effectively. We started a pilot in 2018 to track produced water, which is arguably the largest waste stream we have, particularly in the areas we operate. The water that comes up with oil and gas is, it has some oil and gas in it. In the formations that we operate in, it's also quite salty. So we have to manage that water very carefully. It can have disastrous environmental impacts if it's not handled properly. And so for us, we started to leverage technology to begin to manage that water more effectively. In 2018, we did a field operations-led pilot to get our water haulers on an electronic platform that we control that allows us to geo-track those trucks. It allows us to verify that they actually went to our locations, actually took the water. It tracks where they go, and then it also shows that they went to the proper facility where we dispose of that water so that we can handle it properly. And so we've actually expanded that, and today actually in the middle of 2019 and through today, we now have every single water hauler either on a system that they've paid for similarly, and they're giving us that data, or they're operating on our platform. And so for us, it gives us significant assurance that this waste stream is being handled properly. It dramatically reduces our environmental risk. It allows us to transfer that risk to the folks handling the waste streams for us. And also, it's just good business. So what we found over time is we've now integrated that system with SCADA, an electronic data collection system that is on all of our locations. And we're actually comparing what the trucker is saying they're picking up in terms of the volumes of water and checking that against our own calculation, saying, did they take this amount of water? And what we found is truckers sometimes inflate the volume that they say they're handling. So we pay for that to the trucker, and then we pay for that in terms of how we handle that water on the back end and manage it properly. And so for us, the sustainability initiative, which is fantastic from a environmental perspective, is actually paying for itself and lowering our costs overall. And this is just an example where what's best for sustainability is often what's best for us as a business. This year, we're taking it one step further, where we're actually trying to reduce the number of trucks on the road at the direction of Whiting. So we're actually using this data to auto dispatch trucks and helping ensure that they're only taking full loads of water. So if a truck can hold 200 barrels of water and haul that for us, we're not letting them go out and take 80 barrels for us, resulting in multiple truck trips, multiple traffic on the roads, additional emissions, all those things. We're actually taking it a step further. And again, it comes back to, in this case, it's great for the environment. It's great for the areas we operate in, less trucks on the road, makes everybody safer, but also it's great business. Hauling a partial load costs Whiting more money.
Yeah.
And so from the standpoint of again, that alignment with sustainability and best business practices, in almost every case, they're very much aligned.
Uche?
Yeah, great comments there, and I would say that the two big things I think from DCP's perspective is certainly emissions reduction, and I think a lot of the stuff that Matt alluded to, it's kind of it's interesting when you start looking at how to do that, right? How to start reducing your emissions footprint. It's amazing how many different ways you start uncovering that you can actually accomplish that, right? So whether you're talking about flaring gas, or whether you're talking about reducing the amount of trucks that people drive, whether those people are within your fleet or whether they're your suppliers. One of the initiatives that supply chain is partnering with operations on is tank monitoring, telemetry. So in essence, if you have, envision if you have a massive tank where you may fill it with methanol, lube oil, coolant, what have you, there's a monitoring device that basically keeps track of the tank level, and when it drops to a certain level, there's sort of an automatic dispatch, and the delivery comes out, so on and so forth. So the way that companies, the suppliers that are plugging into that ecosystem, if you will, are able to optimize their routes. So again, a point that Matt brought up is if we're getting, if we're ordering trucks that have 500-gallon capacity and we're only ordering 30 gallons at a time, that's insane, both from a cost perspective and also from a sustainability and environmental impact perspective. So figuring out different ways that we can to optimize those types of things to reduce our overall emissions footprint is one. And then second is sort of power gen and electricity. So we're looking at different ways of how we're consuming electricity, how we can reduce that consumption, what different ways we can affect that and do that more efficiently and better. I would say those two things are kind of commanding our attention right now in terms of how we can just get better at that.
Awesome. Well, given that we're on the topic of sustainability and it's the Women's Energy Network panel, I thought I would ask about diversity. Supply chain, not just in gender, but diversity of thought, the backgrounds of folks who come into this field of work. How diverse is this area, and is it an opportunity for folks who maybe don't have the traditional oil and and gas background or look and feel that we're used to.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on. So I will say, as you mentioned in the intro, I've had the honor of working in a different industries. Working for DCP was my first foray into oil and gas, and I will tell you, I'm going on year 6, and I think somehow I know less than when I first started. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but it's such a complex industry that the diversity of thought is so critical, because it's impossible to know all of the different things there just are to know within the industry. So from that perspective, I think it's very, very critical to ensure that that you're surrounded by people that are smarter than you, that have different experiences from you, different backgrounds. Some of the experiences that I've had outside of the industry have certainly helped inform just how I think and look at different things within the industry. And sometimes I think that's good. Sometimes not being, call it biased from always sort of being in having a certain lens. I think it's good to have a different perspective. And then sometimes not so much. Sometimes you definitely need somebody who knows specifically about how things sort of function in oil and gas and so on and so forth. So there's definitely always, I think there's always room at the table for diversity of thought. Considering the panel that we are on now, I think definitely DCP has made some recent hires that I'm quite excited about. Brought on a few women in leadership from an engineering standpoint. And I think the diversity of thought that they bring to the table as well is something that I'm excited about. Partnering and collaboration, especially when you're a bit smaller from a resource standpoint, you recognize how important it is to rely on other departments. Working in silos just doesn't make sense anymore. You just can't get stuff done. So bringing on those new leadership and inherently that diversity of thought, I'm excited to continue to see where DCP goes because of those women and what they're bringing to the table and how they're going to change sort of the path that DCP is charting.
Matt?
I agree with you, Uche, and we've had similar experiences at Whiting. Recent additions to our team have included female leaders within engineering and otherwise. Specifically, my career, I've worked in a number of different industries. I've worked on the professional services side and also within organizations. All of my oil and gas experience has been in the last 5+ years with Whiting. And within my team, I really value folks bringing knowledge outside of my team into our team. So within Whiting, folks have come over from our finance team, our accounting. I've had folks come over from field operations and also engineering. And really that diverse thinking and those shared perspectives have, in my mind, accelerated some of the benefits and some of the advantages we've brought to the table supporting our operations. And I've modeled my career off of all those different experiences, and to me, a lot of the success and a lot of the growth and a lot of the contributions my team has had to Whiting, and specifically I've had within my role now, has really been a product of those varied experiences and my background working in other industries and in other capacities. So, it's one of those things, and Uche, I agree with you in that sometimes you need a technical expert. Sometimes you need somebody that just knows inside and out that one aspect of what we're doing. But in a lot of cases, that cross-discipline, cross-cultural team comes up with answers that are really outstanding and really have the ability to differentiate your organization from others. And so just see a ton of value in it.
Great. Well, we're pretty close to time. Is there anything you guys wanted to touch on that we didn't get to?
One thing I might say, maybe just as a general comment, is I think there is, and again, I think Matt alluded to this earlier in terms of opportunity. I think there is, especially in the industry now, there is no shortage of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean jumping to another company or doing something of that nature. What I think it more means is within your respective organizations, there's more opportunity that exists probably now than that did before about actually diversifying your understanding. It's crazy how enriching a supply chain career can be when it's informed by other areas outside of supply chain, right? So when you're partnering with operations, when you're partnering with engineering, IT, whomever else it is, it's insane how much that enhances just sort of the ability to be a better supply chain professional, frankly. So I think I would encourage everyone to, continue to have like a thirst to learn, continue to have a thirst to understand and reach outside of your sort of comfort zones and your sandboxes. Because frankly, I think though that type of, when we're just speaking now about diversity of thought, that type of thing is, I think, what ushers companies forward. When people are collaborating in the work that they do and their thought processes and all those different things, now I think more than ever that has become more critical, and the companies that figure out how to do that and do that well, I think that very quickly becomes a competitive advantage.
Completely agree. And the only piece I'd just echo to everybody that's listening in today is, learning and growing professionally. Folks think about learning in terms of education or taking a course or attending a webinar. I've learned more from being thrown onto a project where I may not have been the lead, I may have just been somebody contributing, but it's in an area I had no experience in. And just working and doing something different. To me, you're going to learn so much doing that. And to your point, Uche, right now is a time where we're asking folks to do things differently. We're asking folks to take on new projects. This is really an opportunity for everybody to learn and grow in their career. And if we weren't facing something as unprecedented as COVID right now, if our industry wasn't facing the headwinds that we are right now, those opportunities would be fewer in my mind. Mm-hmm. And so I just view this as a tremendous opportunity from a career perspective.
Well, I think that is a great spot to stop on with that positive note. So thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate your insight. For those that were on the phone, we will have this recorded and put up on our social media pages. And just in case you forgot, I'm just going to share where you can find us. But thank you three again. I really appreciate your time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.